In this chapter, we're going to build a ping pong game. If you're following along and have access to the exercise files, the finished game is sound_final.swift in the Chapter 2 folder. I'm going to open up the game right now. So we have the player paddle and the enemy paddle. You can click on the background to start the game. When the ball goes past the enemy paddle, the player gets a point. We'll create all of that interactivity and all the interactivity of the ball bouncing throughout this chapter. I'll close the game now. So in this chapter, we'll build this game step by step. We'll start with the simplest interactivity, which is making the ball move. Then, we'll work on moving the paddle. And from there, we'll work on building the enemy's artificial intelligence. We'll build a point system, and then add sound to the game as the finishing touch. So let's get started. In this movie, we'll take a look at moving our ball and making it bounce off the walls. If you're following along, I'm in moving_ball.fla in the Chapter 2 folder inside of the exercise files folder. Let's take a look at how this file is set up. There are several layers: action, score, ball, paddle, and BG. The ones we're concerned about for this movie are BG and ball. BG is just a background movie clip, and we're going to use this so that when you click on it, it starts the game. I'm going to lock that layer. And the ball is simply the ball. Note that it has top left registration, and it has an instance name of ball_MC. If you were to go inside of those movie clips, you'd find that they are just simple vector shapes. Let's go to the first keyframe of the actions layer and open the actions panel. Here's some code already written for you. This code's pretty simple. When you click on the background, the initialize game function runs, and then we remove the event listener for the background. Let's take a minute to talk about how the ball is going to move. I'm going to close the actions panel. The ball is going to have an X direction and a Y direction. So the ball will kind of move diagonally. When the ball hits one of the walls, its direction will be reflected. So if it hits one of the walls on the left or right side, it will start moving the other direction. If it's moving left, it'll start moving right. And if it's moving right, it'll start moving left. And if it hits a top or bottom wall, it will reverse direction as well. Let's go back to our actions and write that code. Above all the code that's previously written, let's create two variables. We'll call the first one X direction, and that will be a number. We'll give it an initial value of 10. We'll create a variable called Y direction. That's also a number. And we'll give it an initial value of -10. These variables will refer to how the ball is moving. Since the X direction is positive, the ball will be moving to the right. And since the Y direction is negative, the ball will be moving up. So it will be moving up and to the right. Let's use an enter frame event to animate the ball's movement. I'm going to put this inside of the initialize game function, right above the BG_MC remove event listener line of code. So I'm going to type ball_MC .add event listener, and the event's going to be event.enter_frame, all caps, and the function that's going to run is called move ball. Now let's define the move ball function. We'll do this below the initialize game function. Remember, it's receiving an event, and the type of event is event. So this function is going to reflect the X or Y direction depending on which edge the ball hits. So let's type if ball_MC.x is less than or equal to 0, X direction times equals -1. So if the ball hits the left edge, then we reflect the X direction. So it's moving towards the left, it'll start moving towards the right. Below this, we'll put an else if. Then we'll say if the ball is moved too far to the right, then it will reflect as well. So if ball_MC.x is greater than or equal to stage.stagewidth minus ball_MC.width X direction times equals -1. And below this, we'll put the conditional statements for the Y direction. For this, I'm going to copy all the code that we wrote so far inside of the moveBall function by selecting it and pressing Command or Control C. And below this code, I'm going to paste the code by pressing Command or Control V on my keyboard. I'm going to change the X's in the pasted code to Y's. And I'm going to change width to height, both in stage.stagewidth and in ball_mc.width. And that looks good. And now everything's great except for we're actually never moving the ball. So we have to move the ball. So below all these conditional statements, we're going to write the code that moves the ball. And that's quite simple. It's ball_mc.x plus equals x direction. By using plus equals here, this will say the ball moves to the right if x direction is positive, and it moves to the left if x direction is negative. And we'll type ball_mc.y plus equals y direction. Take a second to look over your code and make sure everything looks right and makes sense. Then test the movie with Command Return or Control Enter. Notice the ball doesn't move. You got to click the background first. And the ball bounces off the walls. Isn't that fun? I could watch that all day. But I'm not going to. I'm just going to close this out. Now that we have the ball moving, we'll use the mouse to control the movement of the paddle in the next movie. In this movie, we'll take a look at controlling the movement of the player's paddle. If you're following along, I'm in moving_paddle.fla in the Chapter 2 folder inside of the exercise files folder. Let's continue writing the code we wrote in the last movie. Let's go to the first keyframe of the actions layer and open up the actions panel. The technique we're going to use to control the movement of the paddle is called easing. And you're probably already familiar with easing if you've used Actionscript tweens before. That's where you can speed up or slow down an animation. We're going to need a few things in order to establish how our easing is going to work. Let's create some variables below x and y direction. So we're going to go down a few lines and create a variable called target x. And the data type will be a number. And we'll give this initial value of paddle_mc.x. Target x will refer to where the paddle wants to go. Once we start moving our paddle, this variable will make more sense, so we'll talk about it more then. Let's go to the next line. We'll create a variable called easing, and that will also be a number, and we'll give this a value of 7. We'll talk about what this variable does and how it works a little bit later on as well. Let's go inside of the initialize game function, and above the ball_mc.addEventListener line of code, let's do the same thing with the paddle movie clip. And by the way, the paddle movie clip's instance name for the player's paddle is paddle_mc. So we'll do the same thing we did with the ball. Add an event listener. We'll listen for event.enter_frame, all caps. And the function we'll run is called movePaddle. Let's define the movePaddle function below the moveBall function. We'll receive an event, and the type is event. And what this function will do is move the paddle. Now I'm going to write a line of code right now, and I want you to write it along with me, and then I'm going to explain what it does. The first thing we're going to give a value to in here is the target x variable. So we're going to tell Flash where the paddle wants to go, and then we'll move it in the next line. So type target x, space equals space, dot mouse x, capital X, minus paddle_mc dot width divided by 2, and then a semicolon. Now what's all this weird stuff mean? Let's talk about it for a second. So remember, we're telling Flash where the paddle wants to go. So first off, the paddle wants to go where the x position of our mouse is. The paddle has top left registration, so I'm going to close the actions panel and demonstrate. That means if my mouse were in this position and we wanted the paddle to move there, then the paddle's x origin would move there. And though that would work, that wouldn't really feel natural to the user. What we want to do is align the middle of the paddle to the user's mouse. Let's go back to our actions. And that's why we're subtracting the width divided by 2. And that will just shift the paddle over half of its width and align the middle of the paddle with the user's mouse. So now that we have where it wants to go, let's move the paddle in that direction. Now, if we just said paddle_mc.x equals target x, that would be fine. It would just align the paddle with the mouse. But that's not as cool looking. What we want to do is have the paddle move towards the mouse position. And that way we get an easing effect. How do we move it towards the mouse position? Let's write that code and then I'll explain it. On the next line, type paddle_mc.x plus equals, then parentheses, target x minus paddle_mc.x, after the parentheses, / easing. So we move the paddle by target x minus paddle x divided by easing. Now what does that mean? How does that work? Let's talk about it. So notice we're using plus equals as opposed to equals, and that's significant. That's just saying we're going to move it in a certain amount. And the way that easing works is instead of moving something immediately to its destination, we move it a portion of the way. And here's how we calculate that. Target x minus paddle_mc.x gives us the distance from where it is, which is paddle_mc.x, to where it wants to go, target x. So we're moving it by the distance, and so the way that we just get a portion of that is we divide it by a number. And so when we divide it by easing, which as we said earlier, equals 7, every frame, the paddle moves 1/7 of the distance closer to its target. Now think about that. The distance is going to change every frame, so the amount that it's going to move is going to be smaller each frame. Now that might sound a little confusing, but let's talk about a real-world example. Imagine yourself standing by a wall, and let's say you're standing 10 feet from a wall. And I really want you to imagine yourself doing this. If you're going to move half the distance to the wall each step, think about how that would work. The first step, you would move 5 feet, and so then you'd be 5 feet from the wall. And then if you moved half the distance to the wall, you would move 2.5 feet, and then 1.25 feet. You start out fast, and you move slower and slower. And that's how we get the easing effect. Let's test the movie and watch this in action. Click, move your mouse, and notice that the paddle follows the mouse. That is great. But also notice that it's kind of going out of the boundaries. So let's just keep it in the boundaries. We'll write that code real quick. I'm going to write this at the very top of the move paddle function. And we're just going to say if the mouse is all the way to the left, then the target x is 0. And if the mouse is all the way to the right, then target x is the stage width minus the width of the paddle. So we'll create a conditional statement. If this.mousex is less than or equal to, and this is as far as we want to go to the left, paddle_mc.width divided by 2. And some curly braces below that. We'll say target x equals 0. So basically, if the position of our mouse is going to make the left edge of the paddle go outside of the stage, then we'll make it want to go, or make the target x the left edge of the stage. Now we'll type an else if statement, and in there, we'll type this.mousex is greater than or equal to stage.stage width minus paddle_mc.width divided by 2. So we're doing the same thing but with the right edge. And inside of the brackets, we'll type target x equals stage.stage width minus paddle_mc.width. That'll just set the target x to make the paddle hug the right edge of the stage. And then below that we'll type an else statement, and then we'll wrap the target x line of code that we already wrote inside of curly braces. And that should do it. So let's test the movie by pressing Command Return or Control Enter. Click, drag, and try to go out of bounds. And it won't go out of bounds to the right, won't go out of bounds to the left. That's great. Let's close this window. We got one more thing to do, and we'll just hide the mouse. So let's scroll up to the top of the code. In the initialize game function, below all the other code, we'll just type mouse.hide, some parentheses, and that will hide the mouse when we start playing the game. So let's test the movie again. Click to play the game, and the mouse hides. And there you have it. We have a working paddle. Let's close this window. Well, congratulations, you got the paddle working. In the next movie, we'll look at bouncing the ball off of the paddle when it hits the paddle. In this movie, we'll take a look at bouncing the ball off the paddle when the ball hits the paddle. If you're following along, I'm in ball_paddle.fla in the Chapter 2 folder inside of the exercise files folder. Let's return to our action script by selecting the first keyframe of the actions layer and opening up the actions panel by pressing Option F9 on the Mac or F9 on the PC. The first thing we want to do is do a hit test to see if the ball is touching the paddle. We're going to put that code inside of the moveBall function. So find the moveBall function in your code. Mine starts on line 16. And then find the if statement that checks to see the ball_MC's Y position. Above that line of code, I'm going to type if, and in parentheses, I'm going to pass in ball_MC.hitTestObject. HitTestObject is a method to see if one object is touching another object. When the method runs, if the objects are touching, the method returns true. So we're checking to see if the ball movie clip is touching paddle_MC. And make sure to close out the parentheses for HitTestObject and for the if statement. And below that line, I'm going to type some curly braces. And the first thing I'm going to do is reflect the Y direction. So Y direction times equals -1. So now let's just test the movie by pressing Command Return or Control Enter. And play the game, and notice that the ball bounces off the paddle just fine. But if you can hit the ball with the edge of the paddle, you'll notice that it doesn't work quite right. So let's fix that. So what we want to do is move the ball's Y position to be right above the paddle. So we'll reflect the Y direction, and below that line of code, I'm going to type ball_MC dot Y space equals space paddle_MC dot Y minus ball_MC dot height. I'll put the ball right above the paddle. We want it to be a little bit higher above the paddle just so this hit test object doesn't return true again. Because if it returns true again, then the Y direction will keep changing. That's the problem that we had before. So we want to push it a little bit higher than the paddle. So I'm going to then subtract paddle_MC dot height divided by 2. And that should work okay. I'm going to test the movie now and try to bounce the ball off of the edge of the paddle. Looks a little bit glitchy, but it seems to be working okay. One thing that will help is if we turn off the ball bouncing when it hits the top and the bottom. Because when it hits the top and the bottom, that's going to be when you get a point or when the enemy gets a point. So let's do that really quick. So instead of making the x direction multiplied by -1, if the ball MC's Y is less than or equal to 0, or if it's past the stage height, what we're going to do is run a function called resetBallPosition. We'll define that in just a second. I'm going to select that line of code and copy it by pressing Command C. Then I'm going to paste it inside of the else if over the Y direction times equals -1 by using Command V or Control V on the PC. And what this function is going to do is just put the ball in the original position, centered with the paddle and above the paddle. So let's scroll up to the top of our code, and then above the initialize game function, we'll define the resetBallPosition function. And so this is what's going to happen if the player or enemy gets a point, essentially. So let's type x direction equals 10. So what we're doing is resetting the x direction to its initial value from line 1. We'll do the same thing with y direction. Set it equal to -10. And then we'll reposition the ball to be centered with the paddle horizontally and above the paddle vertically. BallMC.x equals paddle_MC.x plus paddle_MC.width divided by 2. And so that gives us the center of the paddle. But since the ball has top left registration as well, we're going to have to offset that by moving the ball to the left half of its width. So then minus ball_MC.width divided by 2. And that will align the ball with the center of the paddle. The next thing we'll do is set the ball's Y position. What I'm going to do for that is scroll down in the code and find where we wrote the code inside of the moveBall function. Find the conditional statement we wrote at the beginning of this movie. And we'll copy the code where we set the ball's Y position because we want it to be at the same position. Going to select that line and press Command-C to copy it. Then I'm going to paste that code below where we set the X position inside of the reset ball position function. I press Command-V or Control-V on the PC to paste that code. Let's test the movie and watch the ball position reset as it goes to the top of the screen. Great. We know that works well, and we definitely want to use this for the top position of the stage once we move the enemy. But for right now, we can't do a whole lot of testing with collisions with the ball and the paddle. So until we create the enemy artificial intelligence, we should go back to the bottom of the code and find the conditional statement inside of the move ball function, and mine is on line 39, that resets the ball position if the y is less than or equal to 0. Not the one below that if the y is greater than the stage height, because that'll reset the ball position if it goes out of bounds anyway. I'm just going to take that line of code and put 2 forward slashes before it. And this makes it a comment and temporarily disables this line of code so we can enable it later fairly quickly. Above that code, I'm just going to write y direction times equals -1. Now let's test the movie again. The ball will reflect once it hits the top, and if it hits the bottom, then I'll start over again. And that seems to be working great. I'm going to close the window. Our next goal is to make the ball move at a different angle depending on which part of the paddle it hits. This will make the game a little bit more fun and a little bit more challenging. We'll do that in the next movie. In this movie, we'll use math to calculate the angle that the ball will bounce at depending on where it hits on the paddle. If you're following along, I'm in calculating_bounce.fla in the Chapter 2 folder inside of the exercise files folder. Let's go to the first keyframe of the Actions layer and open the Actions panel. Inside of the Move Ball function, mine starts on line 24, I'm going to find the line of code where we run the hitTestObject method. Mine starts on line 34 and ends on line 38. Right after the line of code where we wrote ballMCY equals, I'm going to create a new line of code, and I'm going to run a function which we'll create in just a minute, and the function is going to be called checkHitLocation. This function will check the location of the ball relative to the position of the paddle. So we're going to pass in paddle_MC. The reason why I'm passing in paddle_MC is because we're going to use this function later on with our enemy paddle so we can bounce the ball off the enemy paddle as well. Let's scroll up to the top of our code, and below the reset ball position function, I'm going to define this function. Let's type function checkHitLocation. It needs to receive a paddle, so type paddle, and the data type is movie clip. This will be void. And inside of this function, we're going to create a few variables. The first one is going to be called hit%. This is going to be a number. Hit% will represent the position of the ball relative to the paddle. Let me demonstrate by closing the Actions panel. Then I'm going to make sure the paddle movie clip is unlocked, and I'm going to select the paddle layer in my timeline. I'm going to deselect the art by clicking in the pasteboard off the stage. That's that gray area off the stage. And then I'm going to demonstrate what hit% will be. So the ball right now looks right about in the middle of the paddle. So in that case, the ball is 50% of the way through the paddle. So if the ball hits here, then its percentage is 0. And if the ball hits here, it's at the very right edge of the paddle, so the percentage would be 100%. So we want to see where the ball is relative to the paddle. Now how do we figure that out? We'll do that in just a second. I'm going to press Command-Z a few times to back up and put the ball in its original position. Let's go to the first keyframe of the Actions layer and open up the Actions panel again. Below our declaration of the hit% variable inside of the checkHitLocation function, mine is on line 15 by the way, I'm going to create a new variable, and this one will be called ball position. And this is going to refer to the position of the ball relative to the paddle in pixels. So this isn't going to give us a percentage, but it's going to give us the distance of the ball from the left edge of the paddle. So this is going to be a number. We'll set that equal to ball_MC.x minus paddle.x. So this will give us the number of pixels that the ball is from the left edge of the paddle. Let's go to the next line and define what hit% is. So type hit% equals And now what we're going to need to do to find out the percentage that the ball is across the paddle is divide the ball position by the maximum value that the ball can be on the paddle. And now you might be thinking, okay, we can just divide it by the width, but let's close the Actions panel. And again, I'll move the ball to the right edge of the paddle. And this is probably the maximum right distance. Yes, it could hit the corner, we know that, and that's okay. But what I want to do is instead of dividing it by the width of the paddle, because that would make the maximum position of the ball here, I'm going to divide it by the width of the paddle minus the width of the ball. Now I'm going to press Command-C, step back a few times, select the first keyframe of the Actions layer, open up the Actions panel again. So hit percent will equal, and I'm going to wrap this in parentheses, ball position divided by, I'm just going to put a space there so it's a little easier to read. Then in parentheses, I'm going to type paddle dot width minus ball underscore MC dot width. And that will give us a range between 0 and 1. So that gives us a percentage. But what I want to do is I want to offset that a little bit so that the ball will move to the left, or we'll get a negative value if it's on the left side of the paddle, and we'll get a positive value if it's on the right side of the paddle. So I'm going to offset this value by subtracting 0.5. So instead of giving me a value between 0 and 1, we're taking this percentage and we're subtracting 0.5 or shifting it by 0.5 so we get a value between negative 0.5 and positive 0.5. And that way, if it's on the left edge, we get a negative value, and that way we can move the ball to the left. Let's go to the next line and type X direction, space equals space, hit percent. That's going to be between negative 0.5 and positive 0.5. Then we're going to multiply that by a number. And I'm going to multiply that by 30. And you can test out and see which value you like the most. But I've tested it a few times and I like this value, so feel free to change this value if you want to. Let's go to the next line. Then we'll set Y direction. And Y direction, what I'm going to do is if the paddle hits the ball, I'm going to speed up the Y speed of the ball a little bit so the ball moves a little bit faster. So I'm going to type Y direction times equals 1.05. That'll make the game a little bit more interesting because it'll get more difficult as the game goes on. It won't be a huge difference, but it'll make a difference nonetheless. I'm going to test the move by pressing Command Return or Control Enter. I'm going to hit the ball with the edge of the paddle, and notice that it moves a little more quickly if I hit it on the edge, and it slows down a little bit if I hit it towards the middle of the paddle. And that looks like it's working great. So I'm just going to close this window, and we have successfully used math to calculate the hit position of the ball relative to the paddle. Congratulations! The next step is creating the artificial intelligence for our enemy paddle. We'll do that in the next movie. In this movie, we'll take a look at creating artificial intelligence for the enemy paddle. The enemy paddle is the blue paddle at the top of the screen. If you're following along, I'm in enemy_ai.fla in the Chapter 2 folder inside of the Exercise Files folder. Let's go to the first keyframe of the Actions layer and open up the Actions panel. Let's scroll to the top of the code. The first thing that we want to do is add an event listener to the enemy paddle so that we can control its movement. Let's do that inside of the initialize game function. Mine starts on line 24. I'm going to write this code right below paddle_mc.addEventListener. I'm going to write enemy_mc, that's the instance name of the enemy paddle, .addEventListener. The event is event.enter_frame, all caps. We'll run the move enemy function when that happens. We'll define the move enemy function next. Let's scroll down to the bottom of the code, and below the move paddle function, I'll define the move enemy function. The move enemy function will actually be a lot like the move paddle function. Where the move paddle function aligns the center of the player's paddle with the position of the mouse, the move enemy function will align the center of the enemy's paddle with the position of the ball. So just like the move paddle function, we'll need to create a variable that holds the target X position of the enemy movie clip. So I'm going to call this enemy target x. It's going to be a number, and we'll give it a value on the next line. We'll set that equal to ball underscore MC dot x minus enemy underscore MC dot width divided by 2. And this code sets the enemy's target X position to be centered with the position of the ball. Just like we needed to set up conditional statements to keep the target X for the player's paddle in bounds, we'll have to do the same thing for the enemy's target X. Let's go down a few lines and type if enemy target X is less than or equal to 0. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. Enemy target X equals 0. That will control the left boundary of enemy target X. So that way the enemy's paddle won't go outside of the left edge of the screen. Now I'll do the same thing for the right edge of the screen. Below the if statement, create an else if statement. Type enemy target X greater than or equal to stage dot stage width minus enemy underscore MC dot width. So in other words, if the enemy target X is going to cause the enemy movie clip to be outside of the right edge of the stage, we'll put it within bounds. And we'll do that right now inside of curly braces. So inside the curly braces for this else if statement, type enemy target X equals stage dot stage width minus enemy underscore MC dot width. And now that we've set the values for enemy target X, we'll move the enemy's paddle. Below the else if statement you just wrote, type enemy underscore MC dot X plus equals, and then in parentheses, type enemy target X minus enemy underscore MC dot X. Remember, this is the distance that the enemy movie clip is from its target, just like we did with the player's paddle. We're going to divide this by easing, just like we did with the player's paddle. And so the enemy movie clip will always be moving towards its target, just like the player's paddle. Now what we'll do is test this movie to make sure that the enemy artificial intelligence is working. Press Command Return or Control Enter to test the movie. Watch the enemy paddle move towards the ball. And now notice the ball is not bouncing off the enemy paddle. We'll set that up in just a second, but just note that the artificial intelligence seems to be working okay. And close this window. And now what we'll do is have the ball react to hitting the enemy paddle. Let's find the move ball function. Mine starts on line 34. Inside of the move ball function, find the conditional statement that checks to see if the ball movie clip is touching the player's paddle. Mine starts on line 44 and ends on line 49. Below this conditional statement, we'll check to see if the ball movie clip is hitting the enemy's paddle. So type if ball underscore MC dot hit test object, pass in enemy underscore MC, and then in the curly braces, we'll reflect the y direction. So type y direction times equals -1. We'll adjust the y position of the ball. Type ball underscore MC dot y equals enemy underscore MC dot y plus enemy underscore MC dot height. And that'll align the top edge of the ball with the bottom edge of the enemy movie clip. We want to give a little bit more space so that this hit test object doesn't come out true twice in a row. So I'm also going to add on ball underscore MC dot height divided by 2. Let's go to the next line. And then what we're going to do is check the hit location on the enemy movie clip. So that way, when the ball bounces off the enemy movie clip, it will go faster to the left or the right, depending on where it hits on the paddle. Type check hit location and pass in enemy underscore MC. Take a second to look over the code and make sure everything looks good and it makes sense. Then test the movie by pressing Command Return or Control Enter. And watch the enemy move towards the ball. And notice the ball's still bouncing off the top of the stage. Let's turn that off real quick. but the enemy is working okay, which is great. Let's scroll down a little bit in the code and find the spot where we commented out reset ball position. Let's erase the line above it that reflects the Y direction, and then uncomment that code by selecting the 2 forward slashes and deleting them, and then test the movie one more time to make sure the ball goes past the enemy movie clip. And sure enough, it does. Let's close this window. And congratulations, you've created artificial intelligence with the enemy paddle. In the next movie, we'll use what we've built so far and build a point system. In this movie, we'll create variables to hold points for both the player and the enemy. If you're following along, I'm in score.fla in the Chapter 2 folder inside of the exercise files folder. Before we start writing code, let's look at some movie clips in the library. I want to look at 2 right now. Let's double-click MC Score in the library to enter its timeline. Notice there are 2 layers, Actions and Block. In the Actions layer, if you select the first keyframe and open the Actions panel, you'll see a simple stop action. Closing the Actions panel, and if you scrub the playhead, you'll see that you have a simple movie clip moving up and down. The movie clip has an instance name of slide_MC. Notice that this is an instance of MC Score elements. Let's look at that movie clip by double-clicking it in the library. This is a simple movie clip that has a vector shape in the background and 2 text fields. One is called player_txt and the other one is called enemy_txt. Now I'm going to return to the main timeline by clicking scene 1. If you scroll down a little bit on the stage, you'll see the score movie clip. We'll just note that it has an instance name of score_MC. Now we're ready to start typing some code. So let's select the first keyframe of the Actions layer on the main timeline, and then open up the Actions panel. Here we'll create 2 variables, one to represent the player score, and another to represent the enemy score. We'll call the one that represents the player score. That will be a number, and we'll give it a value inside of the initialize game function. And I'll create the enemy score variable. Will also be a number, and we'll also give it a value inside of the initialize game function. So let's scroll down in the code and find the initialize game function. And above everything else in that function, I'm going to type player score equals 0, and then enemy score equals 0. The next thing to do is to add to the player score and enemy score as the ball goes past the player or the enemy. Let's scroll down into the move ball function. What we're looking for, the conditional statement that says if ball_mc.y is less than or equal to 0. What this means is the ball has gone out of the top of the stage, which means the enemy missed the ball and the player gets a point. So inside of this conditional statement, I'm going to tab in a few times, and then I'm going to type player score ++. Then below that line, I'm going to run a function called show score. We haven't defined this score yet, but we will in just a minute. Before we do that, let's do the same thing if the enemy gets a point. And this is in the else-if statement below the if statement that we're currently working in. So right above reset ball position in the else-if statement, I'm going to type enemy score ++, and then run the show score function. Now let's define the show score function. I'm going to define it at the top of the code, right below the check hit location function. Inside of this function, I have 3 objectives. The first thing I want to do is update the player score in the text field. Then I want to update the enemy score in the enemy text field. And then I want the movie clip to play. So I'm going to type score_MC, which is the name of the score movie clip, .slide_MC. And that's the name of the animating movie clip inside of score_MC. And now I want to communicate to the text field. So I'm going to type .player_txt.text. So we're setting the text value of this text field, space equals space, then in quotes I'm going to type player, space, close quote, space plus space, and then player score. So this text field will show player, and then a space, and then the current score that the player has. Now I'll do the same thing for the enemy. On the next line, score_MC, .slide_MC, .enemy_txt.text, space equals space, enemy in quotes, space, close quote, plus enemy score. Now once these values are in the text fields, we want that movie clip to animate. So let's go to the next line, and then type score_MC dot go to and play 2. And this will play the score animation. Now let's test the movie and watch the score animation play when we play the game. Test the movie by pressing Command Return or Control Enter. Watch whenever the ball goes past the player, the enemy score is updated and the movie clip plays. And then when the ball goes past the enemy, the player score is updated and the movie clip plays. So that looks like it's working great. The next step is to determine a winner of the game, and we'll do that in the next movie. In this movie, we'll take a look at winning and losing the game, and then playing the game again once you've won or lost. If you're following along, I'm in winning.fla in the Chapter 2 folder inside of the Exercise Files folder. Let's go to the first keyframe of the Actions layer and open the Actions panel. Scroll to the top of the code. The first thing we'll do is create a variable that holds the winning score. So below where we set the player and enemy score, we'll set a winning score. Set this equal to a number, and we'll give it a value of 3. So whoever gets 3 first wins. Scroll down in the code to find the show score function. Now we're going to add to this function to see if the player or enemy has reached the winning score, and then respond accordingly. At the top of the code inside of this function, I'm going to create a conditional statement. If player score is greater than or equal to winning score, then the player has won the game. Inside of the curly braces for this conditional statement, I'm going to copy the lines of code that set the text for the player text and enemy text fields by selecting them and pressing Command or Control C on my keyboard. I'm going to paste that code inside of this conditional statement with Command or Control V. Just tab in that line to make the code more aligned. And then I'm going to change the player text field to say player wins. And I'm going to change the enemy text field to say click to play again. The last thing I'm going to do is run a function called endGame, which we'll write in just a minute. Now that we've defined what happens when the player wins, we'll define what happens when the enemy wins. Let's copy this conditional statement that we just wrote by selecting it and pressing Command or Control C on the keyboard. Below the conditional statement, we'll paste the code by pressing Command or Control V. Change player score to enemy score. And we can also change this from an if statement to an else if statement. And then I'm just going to switch what's in the text fields. So I want the enemy text field to say enemy wins. So what I'm going to do is inside of this else if statement, I'm going to change player_txt to enemy_txt, then change player to enemy. Then in the line below it, I'm going to change enemy_txt to player_txt, and we'll leave click to play again the same, and we'll leave endGame the same. The last thing we'll do inside of this function is wrap the lines of code outside of the conditional statements in an else statement, so that they won't run if somebody has won the game already. So I'm going to type else and some curly braces around the code that we already wrote. Now we'll define the endGame function right below the show score function. The endGame function is going to turn off the interactivity that we create in the initializeGame function. So what I'm going to do is copy the code from the initializeGame function and change it a little bit. So let's find the initializeGame function. Mine starts on line 56. I'm going to copy everything from paddle_MC, which is on line 61, to mouse.hide, which is on line 66, and then press Command C on my keyboard to copy it. Inside of the endGame function, I'm going to paste that code by pressing Command or Control V. In each case where the code reads add event listener, I'm going to change that to remove event listener. And in the one instance where the code says remove event listener, I'm going to change that to add event listener. We'll talk about what this will do in just a second. So what we're doing here is removing the event listener for the paddle, so the paddle will no longer move. Removing the event listener for enemy_MC, so enemy_MC will not move. We're stopping the ball by removing its event listener. And then we're adding the event listener back to the background so we can start the game over again. So basically, what we're doing is pausing the game here. And so when we click the background again, it'll start the game over again. And the last thing we want to do is show the mouse. So instead of mouse.hide, it should read mouse.show. We want to add one more line of code to this function. So below mouse.show, we want the score movie clip to display the ending score and to stay on instead of just coming up and going back down. So I'm going to type score_MC dot go to and stop, and the frame that I want to stop on is 12. And frame 12 inside of that movie clip is where the score is up. So we want the movie clip to stop playing with the score up. So now we have everything that happens when the game ends, and we need to write one more line of code that will happen when the game starts again that will reset the score movie clip. So let's find the initialize game function, which is right below the end game function, if you wrote your code in the same order as I did. And below player score equals 0 and enemy score equals 0, type score_MC dot go to and stop frame 1. And so that'll make the score movie clip go to the beginning whenever the game starts. And now what we do is test the game, try to win the game or have the enemy win the game, and then play it again. Test the movie by pressing Command Return or Control Enter on your keyboard. I'm just going to let the enemy win. So once the enemy gets the third point, the movie clip should stop. Notice that click to play again is getting cut off. That's because the text field is not large enough to accommodate that text. What we need to do is just shrink the font size, and the text field will be big enough to hold all the text. So I'm going to close the Actions panel, go inside of MC Score Elements by double-clicking it in the library, select the player text field on the stage, and decrease the font size to about 24. I'm going to do the same thing with the enemy text field. Now I'm going to test the movie by pressing Command Return or Control Enter, and I'll let the enemy win again, and watch the text field come up. So now we have click to play again. We can read it easily, and enemy wins. We can also read that easily. I'm going to click the background again, and the game starts again. And notice that the player score gets reset to 0 again, and everything is working great. So I'm going to close this window, and congratulations, you've created a game. And at this point, you can do whatever you want. We have a working game, so you can add other things to it. What we're going to do in the next video is add sound so that whenever the ball hits something, we have a little bouncing noise. In this movie, we'll add sound to our game. If you're following along, I'm in sound.fla in the Chapter 2 folder inside of the exercise files folder. Before we look at our action script, let's go to the library and look at a symbol called hit.wave. This is an imported sound. I'm going to right or control click this and choose linkage. This is a simple audio file that I imported that's going to be the sound that happens when a ball hits an object or a wall. When you check export for Actionscript, you can set a class, just like with a movie clip. Except for the class extends the sound class instead of extending the movie clip class. When I want to create a new instance of this sound, I just create a new instance of the hit class. So I'm going to click OK, go to the first keyframe of the actions layer, and open up the actions panel. Below the winning score variable in my code, I'm going to create a variable called hit. The data type will be a sound, and I'll set that equal to a new hit. Capital H. Remember, that's what we set in the linkage properties. All we have to do at this point is just play that sound. We need to play that sound every time the ball hits a surface that it's bouncing off of. Most of the times where the ball is bouncing off of some surface is inside of the move ball function. So let's scroll down to the move ball function. And whenever we see x direction times equals -1 or y direction times equals -1, that's a good time to put our sound. So right below x direction equals -1 in its first occurrence inside of move ball, I'm going to type hit.play and some parentheses. That'll play that sound from the beginning. I'm going to select that line of code and copy it by pressing Command or Control C on my keyboard. I'm going to look for each other instance in my code where I see x or y direction times equals -1. I'm going to paste that code right below it, so it occurs a few more times inside of the moveBall function. In the else if statement where the x direction is reflected, I'm going to paste the code using Command V. In the if statement where we're testing to see if the object is touching paddle MC, I'm going to paste it right below y direction times equals -1. I'm going to paste the code in the if statement where we're testing to see if the ball is touching enemy movie clip, right below where the y direction is reflected. And then last, I'll add it to the reset ball position function. So scroll up in your code and find the reset ball position function. Mine starts on line 14. I'm going to put this code at the very bottom of this function. I'm going to paste it by pressing Command or Control V. Now that we have the sound set up, I'm going to test the sound by pressing Command Return or Control Enter on my keyboard. And there it is. And now we've successfully added sound to our game. Congratulations, you've made a complete game.